So back in the day, in the early world of that Freud created, where we have this thing called therapy, Freud was such an amazing, powerful thinker, and what he gave us was turned our world so upside down that people flocked to go study with him. And he wasn't the nicest teacher, really. He would have these learning circles. People would come and they'd sit and talk with him. But if they disagreed with him, he kicked them out. Plain and simple. So what we're going to look at are three important figures in the study of personality and in the study of psychology overall, who we would call Neo-Freudians. They were people who were close to him, they were people who studied under him, but then people who broke away because they had fundamental disagreements about what makes us do what we do. So remember, Freud believed that at the heart of us, that driving force was really sex. It has a lot to do with our personality development. It has a lot to do with those unconscious forces. And that was the hang-up that a lot of people who went and studied with him had, that they argued with him that it wasn't all about sex. And each one of these three individuals had something else that they thought was the driving force within us as humans. The first one we'll talk about is Alfred Adler, and Alfred Adler has a very special place in my heart, probably because I know more about him than arguably any other theorist from the 20th century. And there's kind of a long story to it that I can tell you on a Zoom session if you're ever interested. But I know a lot about Alfred Adler. So Alfred Adler, what people who follow him would say they follow what we call individual psychology, or they may call themselves Adlerians. But instead of sex as the driving force that makes us do what we do, Adler said that it's actually a striving for superiority, which doesn't sound good. When we talk about superiority, that sounds like we're trying to be above others. But really, the striving for superiority is for us to always be our best selves. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, today I want to do worse than yesterday. Today I want to be a worse person, a worse student, a worse mother. We always want to do better. We're striving for that individual superiority. And that is to conquer those natural feelings of inferiority we have. They start when we're small children, when we can't do things on our own, when we want a glass of water and can't reach the cups, all those types of things, and it follows us through our entire lives. People can get hung up, as in Freud's theory, we had fixations. With Adler, people can get stuck and develop what we call an inferiority complex, where they feel incapable of handling most everything. You can also go the opposite direction and develop a superiority complex. I'm sure you've heard of that and probably didn't realize you were talking Alfred Adler, but that's when somebody thinks they're extremely better than everyone else. Alfred Adler is also the individual who gave us the idea that our personality can be strongly affected by what order we were born into a family. That if we're a firstborn, we may have traits like being responsible and being a rule follower, usually a highest academic achiever, that sort of thing. The babies in the family tend to be peacemakers, tend to be clowns, tend to be much more easygoing. Middle children, while we often believe them to be somewhat ignored, in the end actually have a really advantageous experience because they know how to relate to both olders and youngers. And then there's the only child, which Adler really thought was the worst thing you could do to a person. But in Gen Psych, we don't spend a lot of time talking about birth order. I do teach that class called Personality Psychology in the fall, where we would go much, much more in depth in birth order and have some fun with that. Next up is Carl Jung. Carl Jung and Freud had a really interesting relationship. Freud always thought that Carl Jung viewed him as a father figure, but then kind of got into that whole Oedipus thing and thought that Carl Jung wanted to kill him. Carl Jung was also Christian instead of Jewish, and Freud was really excited that this young man would be able to spread psychoanalytic theory beyond what a Jew could. But in the end, they broke up as well. And the argument was over again, what's that driving force? What is it that makes us do what we do? For Carl Jung, it's a psychic energy. If there was ever a psychological theorist that is all woo-woo, it's Carl Jung. He believed that our unconscious, he believed strongly that we have an unconscious, and that part of our unconscious was our own, but there's another element of our unconscious that we share with all human beings, and he called that our collective unconscious. And it's like we're just born knowing stuff. Within our collective unconscious, we have archetypes, and archetypes is the stuff that we all just know as humans. Their storylines, their images, their ideas of what certain people should be. And we see these reflected a lot in popular culture. An example of an archetype is a hero. People just know what heroes are. You don't have to teach a little kid what a hero is. They get it. Another archetype is the wise old man or the good mother. So things like that, we're just born knowing it. Nobody has to teach it to us. It's just part of being a human. And then finally, there's Karen Horney. Karen was one of the first women to study with Freud. And they did not end up getting along and had some pretty serious disagreements as well. For her focus was not on the sex, but rather on that child-caregiver relationship. And she said the thing that makes us do what we do, not sex, but rather this thing she called basic anxiety, that we are all born with a fear of being afraid, alone, and helpless in this big, scary world. And that we all, in our personalities, adopt a particular way of coping with our basic anxiety. We could move towards people. These are people that get really clingy and dependent in order to not feel afraid and alone in this big scary world. I'm going to smother people. It could be moving away, isolating ourselves. I'm not going to feel alone and afraid in this scary world because I'm not going to let anybody get close to me. Or there is controlling, the moving against people. And that is, I'm not going to feel alone and afraid in this big, scary world because I'm going to make people do what I say. She believed that actually the healthiest strategy is a combination of all three. That we know how to get close to people, we know how to distance ourselves, and we know how to take control. One of her biggest issues with Freud was penis envy, and she said, oh, no, Freud, you have it wrong. In fact, it's not women who wish they had penises, it's men who wish they had wombs. And she coined the term womb envy to explain that the reasons why men tried to keep women in powerless positions was because of their envy that women have the ability to bring forth life. Woo! You can tell he had some serious disagreements with a lot of folks. All right, we're going to kind of skip the middle stuff in this chapter and just head into trait theory, which is a complete shift of gears, but I think you'll like it.